but a deep love for. When I encountered her in September, maybe 400 of us were arrested in September protesting against the war in Iraq, the U.S. invasion. And right before that, I saw Sister Ann in a wheelchair, and I said, my God, I hadn't seen her in so long. And she said, you must come to Louisville. We're going to have a unity dinner, and you had planned to come, I think it was 3 years ago, maybe, and the cancer hit me, so I couldn't come. And thank God that the Lord has allowed me to come here and to both learn and listen, as well as to challenge. I also plan to spend some time later tonight at Expression of One with some of the younger brothers and sisters in the Chocolate West End of Louisville. We're going to have dialogue later tonight on a whole host of different issues, and I look forward to that. Is that Sister Alice there? Yes, it is. How you doing there?
Fine.
You want to introduce yourself?
I'm Alice Wade, organizer, coordinator of the Kentucky Alliance Against Racism and Political Repression. And very proud to see you all here, and everybody is so enthused, and we are just elated ourselves with Dr. West gracing us with his presence tonight.
Welcome once again to the Radical Imagination. I'm your host, Jim Vrettos. I'm a sociologist who's taught at John Jay College of Criminal Justice here in New York and Yeshiva University. As Hannah Arendt put it, those who have power don't need to engage in violent behavior themselves in order to get what they want. It flows to them automatically through the normal operations of the social economic system. And when it doesn't, or when violence is needed in order to enforce that system, they can always pay other people, such as the police, prisons, and armies, to commit it for them. Most behavioral violence is committed by the poor and disadvantaged, who are the victims of relative poverty and structural violence. Since they mostly victimize other poor people, most of the victims of behavioral violence are poor also. Poverty is the mother of crime. The deadliest form of violence is poverty. All the wars, murders, suicides, and genocides throughout history have not begun to kill as many people as have been killed by the economic structural deprivations of the poor. Many politicians and activists don't realize that they can make profound differences in the rates of behavioral violence and win elections by responding humanely and positively to the structural violence that affects millions of lives, reduce levels of malnutrition, provide better public education and medical care, job opportunities and decent, affordable housing, reduce hazardous working conditions, homelessness, and so on. Life becomes more stable, fair, and less chaotic. Crime rates invariably go down. Understanding the negative impact that the criminal justice and penal system has played on so many lives is crucial as well. Out of an $88 million budget in 2021, New York City spends over $14 billion on that system. The system operates on the basis of the false belief that punishment will deter, prevent, or inhibit violence, when in fact it's the most powerful stimulus of violence that we have yet discovered. The violence of the state and the legal system is precisely what maintains the structural violence that causes the behavioral violence. The state thinks it's controlling, deterring, combating, and preventing. A system based on radical love, healing, redemption, and equal justice for all in a fusion politics of nurturing and caring for the welfare of all people, in reality, is the only alternative to the destructive cycle of a fear-based violence. It should be the highest calling of government. New York City could become a city where justice is what love looks like in public, as Cornel West put it. We'll be discussing these criminal justice issues with two of the most energetic, authentic, dyed-in-the-wool, larger-than-life public figures in the city. Curtis Sliwa is a Republican independent candidate for mayor of New York, is making his second appearance on the show. Best known as the founder of the controversial Guardian Angels in 1979, a volunteer safety patrol and crime-fighting group, Curtis has also been a popular AM talk show host over the last 3 decades. He's an outsider candidate who uses populist conservative rhetoric that resonates with great numbers of New Yorkers. Whether that vision can bring about the radical love we're talking about remains to be seen. His candidacy, though, is a serious one and a challenge to conservatives, neoliberals, independents, progressives, and us all. Manuel Gomez is my partner, comrade, and friend on a new podcast we've created called Hunting for Transformative Justice. The Independent has referred to him as the people's private investigator. He's a Desert Storm veteran, an Army Special Ops intelligence officer who served multiple tours in Afghanistan. He's the founder of Black Ops Investigators, an Emmy Award recipient for his role in the award-winning documentary Crime Plus Punishment, and is the architect and author of the Department of Civilian Justice Bill and the Accountability Act. So thank you both very, very much for being here. Really energized by both of you being here. You're terrific New Yorkers, and again, welcome.
Thanks, Jim.
Ready to rip and roar. Rip and roar.
Well, let me ease us in. Let me take my glasses off and let us ease us into this show. Manny's been on a few times, and Curtis is your second time. But I thought we'd ease in this way. Reverend William Barber of the Poor People's Campaign will be making his second trip to the Vatican, October 3rd and 4th. And here are a few quotes from him before his visit. While the global church has stood with poor people, in different ways at different times throughout history, the unified witness of a church that stands with the poor and refuses to let governments blame poor people for the results of systemic injustice is critical to a moral economy. Poor people and anti-poverty programs too often are not responded to. This partnership with the Vatican provides an opportunity to lift the voices of poor and low-income people who are too often ignored in public conversations about the cost of government programs. So what my question is to you both, and you're both Catholics, right? You both come from the church,
Yeah.
Which doesn't make any difference really, but since we're talking about the Pope here, Reverend William Barber, how do you respond to these ideas as two public figures involved as crime fighters who are trying to prevent crime and make people safe?
Well, I think my Roman Catholic training was very strong early on in life. I had aunts on my Italian side who believed in not only going to church every Sunday, but doing novenas on Monday, Stations of the Cross, and that poverty brings you closer to God. This is what I was taught. Selfless service is the route to determining who you are in this global range of things. I remember when I went to Brooklyn Prep High School, a Jesuit high school, that eventually they kicked me out to the curb in my senior year. I oftentimes engaged in debate with liberational theologists who were invited guests to come to Brooklyn Prep and talk about the struggles of the poor and the impoverished amongst the class structure that existed throughout South America and Central America. Later on, I was able to experience that myself. So I had a lot of discourse in this area. I never really could go in one direction completely or the other direction completely, but I certainly would recommend it for everybody growing up. It's almost like a smorgasbord of ideas that you're exposed to, and then you cherry pick the ones that you think can work. But compassion, I think the church teachings, not the persons, like priests.
Yeah, all right. But
never trusted the priests, right? They lived ostentatiously. The nuns in the convent, they lived a chaste lifestyle. So I always listened to the nuns, not the priests. But in the guidance of the church is the call to help the poor and the impoverished. As my father taught me, there by the grace of God goes you, Curtis. Never make fun of these people who are down on their luck, who have emotional problems, whatever problems are plaguing them in this life. there by the grace of God go you. So I've benefited from Roman Catholic teachings, but again, I've cherry-picked the ones
But
that I
Curtis, and we'll get to Manny too. Listen, Barber and the Pope aren't cherry picking here. All right, they're saying they advocate the investment in anti-poverty programs in the United States. Partnership with the Vatican provides an opportunity to lift the voices of the poor and low-income people who are too often ignored. So this is you as a possible mayoral, our mayor will have that sort of power to help this partnership happen, and that's what we're. Are you in on that? And then Manny, what do you think about it? So Curtis, what do you think about these?
I believe part of the teaching has to be to teach you how you can help yourself, not just always caring for you from the cradle to the grave. So that's number one. And number two, there is a lot of sanctimonious hypocrisy in that my church owns so much in the world, so much wealth. And it's never sometimes used to actually fulfill the work and the teachings of Jesus Christ. So again, it's mental. Do I want help? Obviously. I've actually said we should experiment with universal basic income, see in what direction it goes. You know, being a Republican and independent with conservative leanings, that hasn't gone very well with that crowd. But I'm open. I'm open.
Nixon talked about that in the 70s. So
yes,
Manny, let me give you a chance to respond.
Well, I mean, right now as a private investigator, and Curtis, I see something that a lot of people don't see. All right, and I'm out in the street all hours, all days, 7 days a week, and I'm hunting down criminals and bringing justice to people who are the voiceless of New York. And while doing that, I see all this homelessness. I see women with children sleeping on the floor on 42nd Street on 8th Avenue. I see children sleeping on the floor on 11th Avenue and 13th Street. I see old ladies sleeping on the floor in the Village. And I see this throughout New York. And here we are, the financial infrastructure capital of the world, city, and we have this problem exploding all around us. And then we've gotten to the point in society where nobody is really paying attention. It's become normal. We just walk over them and walk by them. And what I like to see, and I firmly believe that I think Curtis will be the candidate to do this, is for the city to reduce on some of the agencies that don't produce a result. Okay, like the Department of Investigations, DOI. It is one of the most useless things in New York. I mean, they really don't work. To take that money and put it towards these homeless programs, take these abandoned city lights lots that we have in Brooklyn, in the Bronx, and Manhattan, Upper and the Heights, that are not being utilized, and put these new boxable homes that are affordable living so that we can try to get a handle on this homeless situation. And I think, and I'm hoping that Curtis, when he becomes mayor, that will address this issue so that, one, not only do we give them dignity, but we also deal with the COVID situation, because many of them are not received their injections, and many of them are still carriers and act as a medical threat to the rest of us. All right, besides the other people who haven't gotten their injections. So I like to hear what Curtis will do on that aspect, because this is something that I see every single night when I'm in the streets. Curtis?
Well, there's no doubt, and it's getting worse and worse. I think this mayor has not only been oblivious to it. At first, he wouldn't even acknowledge how it was growing in leaps and bounds, but his whole concept was warehouse the homeless. Get them into a building where they have to meet their curfew at 10 at night, and then kick them out the door at 7:30 in the morning, where they roam the streets, and it's nothing but double trouble because they're not getting any services for maybe what it is that is causing some of that homelessness, like drug addiction, yes, alcohol addiction, emotional issues. Yes. I prefer to take the single able-bodied men and women and the families and repurpose them upstate in camps where they become self-sufficient. They're growing their own crops. This was the concept of Camp LaGuardia, coming out of Fiorello LaGuardia and the Depression for single able-bodied men, most of whom had alcohol issues, some had drug issues, but most of them had no negotiable skills, so they were never going to seek employment. Then they had a Job Corps there, so they taught you negotiable skills. Up there in Orange County, where Camp LaGuardia was, there were few, if any, temptations, because about the only way you could get into trouble was cow tipping. And then eventually, when you had a negotiable skill, when you had released these demons that caused you to want to drink yourself into the grave, then if you want to go back to New York City, great. You have an opportunity to function. Then we can find some kind of long-term housing that you can have as an individual. You know who canceled that program? The billionaire Michael Bloomberg. You know why? Because he said, well, the analytics are it's too costly. Too costly. Are you crazy? This is repairing people's lives. You can't put a cost on that. And if you're getting results, why would you cancel a program and then just warehouse people? And look, there are so many areas upstate now. They're fallow. They're empty. People have left. There's lots of land. We pay for reservoirs upstate. Thankfully, there's less prisons, less prisoners being sent upstate. But there are people who can go up to a camp. It's like when you have young people who are in trouble, what do they have? They go out to Montana. They're bucking broncos. They go to a Swiss chalet. You get them out of the city so they're away from the temptations, and hopefully they can get back on track. I want to invest in people. I don't want to invest in failed programs that just keep perpetuating the situation and show that we have no compassion towards these people.
Is that what you mean when you use your phrase, let capitalism work? And actually, you mentioned Bloomberg before, and as you're probably aware, yesterday, I think it was, the Times reported that Eric Adams is turning to Bloomberg for advice in his campaign, possible transition. And here are a few quotes. Again, Adams' campaign on a program of restoring public safety and prosperity frequently voiced concerns of the business class. Recently decried the city's state of disorder and has cited a laundry list of ills such as graffiti, ATVs, homelessness, and shootings. Last point, these people, those who are paying the taxes, the rich and the super rich, aren't using the hospital system generally. They don't use the subways in many cases. They're not using the public schools. So their focus is on having a safe city. You've got to give them those minimal services, even though that seems disproportionate in other areas. And I think Adams kind of gets it. Now, read between the lines is that Adams has aligned himself with those multi-billionaires, donor classes, Wall Street, the rich real estate developers. How does your program, Curtis, let capitalism work differ in any way? And how many people are you, because we're talking about 800,000 people that can't pay their rent. Upstate is pretty, I'm not sure they want 800,000 people up there roaming the dairy farms there. But anyway, go ahead. And
number one, they're not going to be roaming. Number two, they want the money. Trust me, they need the money up there. That's why they were into the prison industry. That's what kept and subsidized so many of those communities. In fact, they even wanted the enrollment of a prison considered in their census, so it could lead to more money that they would get from the federal government. Remember?
Yes, and they would use them as the population for their vote on their voting list. No, right. I get all that. But
right.
Is
so
that
when you mention Michael Bloomberg now being a consigliere to Eric Adams, he's controlling Eric Adams. They're whining, dining, and pocket lining Eric Adams. You really think they care about the needs of the poor and the impoverished, the indigent, the emotionally disturbed, the homeless? Do you really think they care about that?
Make the argument that you are the man of the people.
Well, there's no doubt about it.
Okay,
but there's a difference.
Sending people up to the country, as you know, I get that to a certain extent. But what about building the communities, restructuring them, making
but let me
our communities livable, as Manny is talking about too.
Well, let me address one thing first. Remember the other week, Philip Chow, the trendy restaurant there. So a stick-up crew goes in, and I knew right away it was an inside job. And they start robbing the men of their Rolex watches, and they shot one guy in the leg because he didn't give up his Rolex watch too quick. Who all of a sudden ran there and talked about this is not going to happen in my city? Eric Adams says he was sitting down in this trendy restaurant. Quite frankly, they could have hired private security officers, armed security officers. I was up in Claremont Park where they had a Central American celebration. You probably remember that story in the South Bronx, where 5 was shot, 1 was killed. I was there for those people, the poor and the impoverished. They need the public safety. They can't afford to pay for public safety. That's where our focus needs to be, not at Philip Chow's.
I understand, but Curtis, and
Where?
then many pop in here too. Listen, this is how Giuliani got started, right? Get rid of the squeegee guys, send them upstate, wherever it was. We're talking about structural issues of massive problems in the public schools, in housing, jobs, etc. Go ahead, Manny.
You know, one of the things I think, Curtis, I would like to say you do. One, I know your background, and I'm very familiar with your goals back in the 80s when you started the Guardian Angels, and you started something that the public really needed. And I'm really rooting that you get into office, because the problems that I'm experiencing, I'm hoping you can change. The problem I'm experiencing is, for example, your partner right now, Eric Adams, he's the one you're running against, is right now want to bring back stop, question, and frisk. Okay. We saw the problems that has. I get hundreds of cases regarding that and people's rights being violated. Now he wants to put a different hat on it and bring it back. Actually, Jim Vrettos actually stood up against that and got arrested with a bunch of Congress members and assembly members protesting against the actual civil rights violating procedure of stop, question, and frisk. Now, I used to be a cop a long time ago, and as a cop in the city, I worked in some very bad areas in the South Bronx, in Queens, and in Brooklyn. One thing I learned is that the justice I give now as a private investigator, freeing people's lives and proving them innocent, I could not do as a cop. And the reason why is because the police department, you know, they keep saying they're going to change it, defund the police, do this, do that. But we have the same hierarchy still running that department. And even though we get a new mayor, we put a new commissioner, the same corrupt chiefs, the same corrupt inspectors are still there. And what I like to see, Curtis, if you can let the city know how you're going to change that infrastructure within the police department. And then the second thing is, like I said, agencies like DOI. This is a city agency, Department of Investigations. They're not providing the investigations to the public. And I've gotten hundreds of complaints given to me from white, black, Jewish, Italian, all throughout the city. And this agency and lawyers, I've spoken to countless lawyers, how useless this agency is, and it's sucking taxpayer dollars. And, you know, I wrote a piece of legislation in closing with Frank Serpico, which I know you know who he is, okay, from the movie Serpico. It's called Department of Civilian Justice. And as Curtis knows, which he's most likely seen the movie God knows how many times, at the end of the movie, Serpico told a famous speech about us having an independent body to report the police department and for people to get an investigation against the type of corruptions that they're experiencing. Now, we came up with the CCRB, Curtis, but then the CCRB turns around, and after they find the cop guilty, they send it back to the police department to judge themselves, correct themselves, monitor themselves, and then punish themselves. I mean, this is an insane thing. It's useless. We can't have a system of checks and balances when an agency is checking itself and punishing itself. And then here's the thing I would love Curtis to do, if possible. The mayor can't even go in there and tell them what to do, because they took that power away from the mayor maybe 50, 60 years ago. I like to see the mayor get that power back, where that he can fire them and make that difference. What do you think, Curtis?
All right. Well, number one, the Department of Investigation. Guess who is appointed to lead the Department of Investigation? usually the best friend of the mayor who just got elected. Now, you really think that person is going to investigate the mayor or any of his cronies? I mean, Department of Investigation needs to be completely independent and autonomous, and needs to have the ability to freely investigate wherever the investigations take them, and not be controlled because of the appointment that was made by the mayor. The same thing happened with Cuomo in Albany. You know, you had all these good government investigative state agencies, and who appointed their chairman? It's Andrew Cuomo. They're not going to investigate him. So I would start with that. Number two, I take a different viewpoint towards the police department. I think too many mayors have stuck their nose into the police department and interfered with the police commissioner. So, for instance, we see in this case Bill de Blasio, who, if you remember, got so into the deputy chief in charge of operations, Pachada, the highest ranking Dominican American ever in the police department. And that's the other thing. When I look at candidates, I'm going to prioritize Latinos and Latinas. They're 30% of the membership of the police department. They're the biggest minority, soon to be the majority of the police department, and they're never considered as police commissioner. No mayor has ever considered a Hispanic in that position. And I'm saying to myself, why? And I'll tell you the dirty little secret. Because in my conversations with men and women advising me, they say, well, you know, Hispanics, it could be corrupted by the drug culture. I said, what are you talking about? That's the reason that Italians weren't promoted in the 50s and 60s, is because they thought they could be corrupted by Italian organized crime. So these old lingering stereotypes, these prejudices that exist, they need to be broken open. But I believe a police commissioner appointed by the mayor, but he or she has got to have autonomy to run the department. And look, Rudy, as much as I like Rudy, he interfered with the police commissioner. Bratton, he interfered with Safer. He interfered with Kerrick. Then you had basically Bloomberg, who didn't interfere at all. He left Kelly alone. And now you have de Blasio, who interferes with Dermot Shea every step of the way. I think you already have so many agencies investigating police corruption or police brutality. You have now Tish James, who's involved with the state attorney general. Whenever there's a police shooting, they can investigate. You have the local DAs. You have, obviously, Department of Investigation. I would agree with you, obviously, render them impotent. You have the police investigation, the internal affairs. I would wean it all down so that it remains independent and autonomous. But I think the mayor has way too much power. Way too much power. And we've seen it get abused time and time again by friends and foes of mine.
So, Curtis, you know, and on that note, what would be the difference between you and Adams? I mean, because Adams, it looks like he's going to go down the Bloomberg path. So how would you run it differently?
He's not. I'll tell you what, he's not. He's already mentioned a few African-American women already in the department that he would consider to be police commissioners. He has said he wants a police commissioner to be basically more of a public relations person talking about community affairs, and let the chief of operations run the department. I'm like, community affairs, public relations, police commissioners. He wants to repurpose it, but he wants to control it. And he keeps mentioning people, and the kind of people he keeps mentioning, I have a feeling he is going to be pulling their strings. He is going to want to know everything going on in the police department. And I think we have more serious issues that have to be dealt with in the city that requires the mayor's attention. The police department can be run. They need to have oversight. Look, you even have a federal monitor that has been appointed from the Justice Department. They probably have more oversight than any other agency, but there are abuses that have to be dealt with. There are reforms that have to be put into place. There's no doubt about it.
But that's what Serpico spoke about in the 70s, and it hasn't changed. I mean, right now, you cannot have a police department, Curtis, check itself, monitor itself, investigate itself, and punish itself. In New York City, that is the case. Okay, and these
right. But wait a second. Wouldn't it be correct for the very people who make those decisions to actually apply the same standards to themselves? For instance, look at the city council. They investigate themselves. Should we really be allowing city council members to investigate themselves? Look at Cuomo. You want Hasty investigating him? They're like cronies. The speaker. So I think once the political process, it's do as I say and as I do, it'd be a lot easier than to say to the police department, hey, you have to be monitored by an outside agency, and their decision is what is going to be prevailing. They're not doing that.
That's fair enough, but let me throw out something else at you here. Wall Street Journal article today. Who's going to investigate this? Major Wall Street Journal investigation came out today, reported 131, these are federal judges now, broke the law by having cases where they had financial interests. I think it's about out of 700. So it's not just one or two individuals here, 131 cases. Judges failed to recuse themselves from 685 lawsuits from 2010 to 2018 involving firms in which they or their family held shares. So again, who is going to be the independent investigatory body that's going to get down to this?
That's a good point.
Well, now, isn't it interesting that you could be appointed a member of the United States Supreme Court and never having been a judge? But be a federal judge, right? You have to be a lawyer. So it's almost like incestuous. I would like to get more average, everyday people involved in the process.
All right.
Well,
Because the moment
and
it's
what about
and parochial, it breeds corruption.
And what about the prosecutors, Manny, and the judges, the state
well,
judges?
and I'm glad you brought that up,
involved.
Jim, because right now, Curtis, this is another problem that New York City suffers from. And this is something Jim just hit it when he said 131 judges were found corrupt on cases. Now, the New York City judges have what they call immunity. So if I judge Curtis Sliwa, let's say on a case for stealing chewing gum, hypothetically, okay, and then I falsify the decision or I don't follow the letter of the law, and Curtis was innocent, and I can get away with whatever actions I take. There is no oversight over them, Curtis. And right now, I'm going to tell you something. In New York City, in Queens, is number one for judicial corruption. Number one. Manhattan is number 3. The Bronx is number 2. Brooklyn is number 4, especially in the Canarsie area. Okay. And then Staten Island would be number 5. How do I know this? Because I've been dealing with this for 10 years now, and I've been putting together a chart full of the judges in New York. Right now, 40% of the judges within the 5 boroughs of New York City that were appointed by New York City, okay, let me say that again, appointed by New York City, have more than 40 to 70 of their cases overturned because of failing to take legal proper action for being biased or being corrupt. On average, more than 40 of their cases, and Curtis, nothing happens to them. I see
and in addition,
get away with it. Huh?
In addition, probably the worst sin of sins is in surrogate court or probate court. As you know, those judgeships are controlled by the county leaders. Obviously, there are no Republican strong county leaders other than Staten Island. It's all Brooklyn, Queens, Manhattan, and the Bronx. Yeah. And if you go into probate or surrogate court, you get screwed, because the lawyers, you know, who have their beaks in the trough, have been chosen by the county chairman and the county committees. And it's all the synergy exists between the judges and the lawyers, that the families who seek relief oftentimes get screwed time and time again. So you're absolutely right. There has to be an independent and autonomous way to get these judges on the bench. And it can't be through the county. They call it now the judicial conventions, right? Each county has a judicial convention. As my grandfather, Bares Fidel Bianchino, would say, ma quana mai. What do you mean a convention? They're picked. They buy the judgeships. They buy a table for $25,000 at the annual county dinner, and all of a sudden they're considered for a judgeship. Everybody knows that, and nobody does anything to correct it.
You're right, and that's
what would your grandfather be saying, Manny? Would he be saying the same thing?
No, my grandfather would be saying, "Press the fight and take it to him." All right,
All right.
But I will tell you,
grandfather too.
Yeah, well, he was a Korean War vet and a counterintelligence officer back then. Actually, one of my role models to become an 18th Airborne. I actually wear the same beret as you, Curtis. I wear a red one because I was 18th Airborne, retired, Fort Bragg. But I would like to say, on behalf of myself and Frank Serpico, will you be the type of mayor that will accept legislative proposals to bring about oversight over these judges? Frank and I have written stuff like this, and it's been very difficult to get up in there because every time we do this, Serpico and I, people stand there and say, well, we don't want to take on that power. Who are you to correct the unrightable wrong, to right the unrightable wrong? And the problem with our judicial system in New York City is the corruption starts from the judges allowing the prosecutors to get away with not meeting deadlines, not following the letters of the law, not dismissing cases when people are innocent, not punishing them when they lie in court, not punishing them when they don't do what's judicially correct. These judges are letting them get away with this in New York, and we have no legislation until recently. Myself and Serpico wrote legislation, but it's been difficult to get it to come up to the mayor's office and the other offices to change the judicial system. Would you be a mayor that would allow for a guy like Serpico or a guy like me or just a guy like Curtis Sliwa to be able to submit a proposal in your office and be that kind of mayor that's going to actually read the proposal and say, hey, we can make a difference and maybe give it a shot? Or is it going to be like Eric Adams as borough president? When you bring it to his office, you get no result unless you got.
Remember, Eric Adams, like Bill de Blasio, was a product of the Kings County corrupt Democratic machine.
I agree.
I happen to know the old chairman, Frank Sedio, because he grew up with me in Canarsie. Always said he had my back whenever I get involved in street battles. And I'd say, hey, Frank, I never saw you. And I looked behind. You were gone.
Amen.
But that has been a corrupt machine going back to Meade Esposito, went to jail. Clarence Norman went to jail. Vito Lopez, perv, corrupt. Frank Sedio, corrupt, right? All these guys corrupt. What, you don't think their members are corrupt? When it comes to judgeships and probate and surrogate, the whole system is corrupt. So, of course, I'm an outlier. They have never accepted me. I'm on the outside looking in. First thing I do when I'm in City Hall is I put up a big sign. Lobbyists, you are not permitted in City Hall. I'll kick your ass. You're going out, and you're not going across the street to the offices of the city council members because average people don't have lobbyists. And it's clear, having been before judges. You know how many times I've been before judges? Remember, not only arrested 76 times,
wow,
but family court. Oh, have I been through the ringer in family court? Hey, my own problems, right? I brought that upon myself. But I've seen judicial incompetence. Remember, I went 4 trials with John Gotti Jr., who was charged with kidnapping and attempting to kill me. And he skated on technicalities, and I saw exactly. I saw a federal judge there playing hearts while I was getting grilled in cross-examination. Hey, judge, hey, I've seen judges fall asleep where the clerk has to wake them up, has to hit them a few times.
Yeah.
It's like there is no competency test often. Federal judges who are in their 90s who are like drooling on themselves. Come on. This is nuts. This makes sense.
Manning, is he answering the question for you?
We're doing this. We're proposing something, and I'd like to get Curtis's feedback. We're proposing a new legislative proposal called the Truthfulness and Decision Act, which will give a judge 3 strikes. So if you get 3 times where you're found the appellate court overturns you for failing to follow the letter of the law, for either being biased or corrupt, or for falsifying decisions, you'll lose your judgeship and you're out. So 3 strikes and you're out. And this is a piece of legislative proposal which I've written and actually have other individuals with me on this, Norman Siegel and so forth, other people that I show my Department of Civilian Justice bill for. They, have helped me at least in that aspect. But this one I'm talking about is brand new. And I'd like to know, would you be a mayor that would be okay with having the 3-strike rule? If a judge messes up 3 times, he's out and we get someone else to replace it. because
no
that's the
doubt.
highest authority we have to judge people, is being a judge. And if the
They
judge is
not only
corrupt,
that, they make determinations that are life and death decisions. Now, we
yes,
don't have a death penalty, but what I mean by life and death, deciding on finances, money, allocations, time served, time allocated. Just look at Charlie Hines. Well, you mentioned Charlie Hines when he was the DA. Oh, he's got all these people worshiping Charlie. How many innocent men were sent to do triple life without parole,
wow,
who had their rights violated from day one to the point where finally they were let go. And even then, DAs would say, well, we have to review the process. Wait a second. You had the guy in the tank for 30 years upstate. What is wrong with you? You're going to hold him another 6 months? Cut him loose.
So
And
Curtis,
as you
Curtis-
mentioned, qualified immunity. They all have qualified immunity. They're all protected by the taxpayer. But who do we want to strip qualified immunity from? Police officers. Not Andrew Cuomo, who's protected, but we're starting with police officers. How about strip qualified immunity from all of them? Huh?
That's
that sounds like,
exactly
Curtis,
right.
you're
That's
backing
exactly
up
right.
what Manny is saying, right? Sounds like you're going along with what Manny is saying, is recommending.
Yeah, no. 3 strikes.
Okay.
Hey, remember,
Listen,
3 strikes
guys.
and you're out in
All right,
baseball. 3 strikes. The catcher catch the foul tip. You're out as much as you complain to the umpire. You're
That's
right.
Yeah, but Judge was I don't know if they remember the Boston game there. They dropped the catcher dropped it on the 3rd strike. I'm not sure if it was really. Anyway, they won the game. That's the main. But listen, let's turn to stop and frisk. I'd like to know what your positions are, both of you, on that. How you differ from Adams, and so just to give some social context to this. I was involved in the first stop and frisk trial back in 2011. Demonstration protest, which we got arrested up in Harlem, Cornel West, and a lot of spiritual, religious leaders, and so on, some councilmen. So I was teaching in John Jay College, and I would have students. I was regularly teaching an 8 a.m. class, and regularly 8-10 of the students would be coming in way late. Finally confronted them. Young Black Hispanic men, they told me how they were stopped and frisked in their communities, usually Brooklyn, Queens, and so on, Bronx, and thrown up against the wall, and et cetera. And that's this happened numerous times. I did some research on it and then took a stand on it. What do you feel its purpose is, if any, stop and frisk? What would you bring it back? Do you disagree with Adams on this? What did it accomplish other than, and I'll tell you this, both to Curtis and to Manny, I had police officers in the class who would say, this policy is screwing up my relationship with the community. It was causing greater anger, greater disrespect. Anyway, what did you think?
Oh, there's no doubt. Look, in the Bloomberg years, the last 4 years, when he had the quota, and we know there was a quota, and
Right.
he was stopping and frisking close to
Absolutely.
700,000, mostly young males of color a year. That was outrageous. But when you have gang warfare breaking out, like I've been involved in, when Crips are going at Bloods or Trinitario subsets are having war with one another, because most times it's the gang itself that's having an internal war. And they're shooting at one another randomly. And then there's a cycle of revenge, and then drive-by shootings. We never had drive-by shootings before in New York City, never. That was something that was invented by Al Capone, formerly of New York City, but he adopted it when he took over the mob in Chicago. And it's something that's synonymous with the gangs, Bloods and Crips in Los Angeles. But all of a sudden we have drive-by shootings, because when you have known gangbangers, and they're already throwing gang signs, and they're talking trash about how they're going to retaliate, and you know that's happening because of your intel, and you're not stopping and frisking known gang members ahead of time, and you're allowing them to carry their guns fully loaded, driving around looking for targets, then how do you stop that and prevent it? It's the only method that I've seen work. And the gangs understand what the rules are.
Well, with the gang violence, the problem we have, again, it goes back to our jails. Right now, the city's jails, the level of corruption in there is just staggering. I mean, I have a lot of kids that were never gang members that are being falsely arrested come in there, and now they're being forced to join gangs. And then I found numerous correction officers bringing in drugs, bringing in illegal cell phones, bringing in shanks and devices that are hurting these kids, and then forcing them to become gang members. So literally, when a lot of our children are going into these programs and being stopped and questioned and frisked, and then being arrested for not having ID for walking into their own building, okay, they're coming out from gladiator school. And there's been no recourse that the mayor has done, our current mayor, to resolve this problem. I mean, that's what the documentary I'm in,
Right.
Crime and Punishment.
The quota system is still alive, right?
Huh? The quota
Okay.
system is, I can prove it to you, Curtis, that the quota system's alive. You want to know how? Because in the current NYPD patrol guide, you can go into any police store and buy it. You will see they have, it's called, instead of calling it a quota, they call it performance objective. So they want you to get 40 summonses a month. They want you to get so many stop, question, and frisk a month. And they're calling it now performance objective. So all they did was change the name, but it's a quota. And that's the problem. We're not correcting that. It's illegal. And our cops are doing it. And then I want to show you something else that the current police commissioner put into effect, Curtis. He made it impossible now for cops to record secretly what's going on for corruption in the police department. Because of the documentary that I'm in, Crime and Punishment, I'm the one that got the cops to record. I got the cops saying on camera, a police captain, if you don't stop blacks between the ages of 14 to 19, you're going to be working in Pizza Hut. I have him on recording for that. I have in the documentary a black cop being told by a black sergeant, we are not going to give you a good evaluation because of the way you speak so educatedly and you stand your ground. Who are you to stand up against us with the NYPD? I have that on recording. They violate New York State law.
There's no doubt. There's no doubt. I've certainly been a victim of that in the first 13 years of the Guardian Angels. Even Eric Adams wrote an editorial long before he announced he was running for mayor in the Daily News, an op-ed piece, talking about in one of his first tours of duty as a transit cop, the desk sergeant told him and the other newbies that they should go out there and harass and, if necessary, arrest the Guardian Angels. And he, to his credit, said, I'm not doing that. These folks aren't doing anything wrong. So, no, I totally understand that culture, and I totally understand what you're talking about. And I have no problems in recording individuals so that the general public has a right to hear specifically what's transpiring, because obviously there's a code of silence. There's a blue wall of silence. I think we all
was talking about.
Even though the department is changing its demographics enormously, people don't realize this is not the Irish Police Department it used to be. The backgrounds of people are incredibly diverse, but there still is a blue wall of silence.
It's the same wall.
That has to be broken. Yes.
And another thing, we put these body cams up, Curtis, but these cops now, they shut them off. We should have body cams on the entire time of your tour so that you know what's going on, because that's how you hold accountability. Right now,
I think many of the cops have learned that the body cams have actually bolstered their arguments when they were in a situation.
Amen.
More video is better than less video or no video. Let's see all the video and come to our conclusions. It's like my belief is more free speech, not less free speech. If you hate speech, more video, not less video. And let's look at it and analyze it, but also listen to the cops and, yes, the suspects or whoever felt that their rights were being violated. Let's give a full hearing.
Great.
Well, as a mayor, will you order that to the police department, that they're required to now keep that audio on and video on so that the public can have oversight over that behavior?
Yeah, except in the case where they're having private conversations,
Well,
let's
that's
face it,
understandable.
their wives about their kids who are causing
Well, yeah,
chaos, or their husbands, or
that's
any
understandable.
other
And
personal
guys,
stuff going on.
I've got to order. We only have about a minute and a half to go. I'd like to have one more question, maybe one or two, fast here. I got to order it within a minute and a half. What's your opinion, Curtis, on the Democratic move to expand the social safety net? Do you support these attempts structurally? Do you think they're needed and benefit most New Yorkers that you will hope to serve? And are there other models of policing do you think that would work in New York City, from the Scandinavians, from the Brits, and so on? But would this expansion of the social safety net help so many hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers, so that, yes, we got the idea about personal responsibility, totally got that. Some might have to be gone to camps and so on upstate, but what about that? What about the social safety net?
Yeah, well, look, we touched on it before. Universal basic income.
Right.
One of the sort of pioneers of that was Milton Friedman, who's considered like the uber capitalist of modern day America, where he said, "Look, you got all these people who are making wealth, and then you have those that are not. And at a certain level, you're going to have to give money to these other people who have no means." I want to experiment with that. I want to see where it goes. I didn't demean Andrew Yang when he brought that up the way Eric Adams did. But secondarily, I think most importantly, what we have to do is we have to do a much better job at teaching our children early on their responsibility to take care of themselves and everyone else. We're not doing that. We're basically saying it's government's role. Guardian angels. We take on the responsibility. It's selfless service. We shouldn't always be dependent on government, because I'm telling you, most times government is going to be $1 short and a day late. And then when you don't have government to depend on, you don't know how to fend for yourself. You don't know how to take care of yourself.
Well, we could have an argument on that. FDR, certainly perhaps the welfare of people might be the highest goal of government. Would agreed with you that many times it falls short. Manny, in the last few seconds, give us your last word on this. I wish we had more time, but
Well, I just want to say I wish you the best, Curtis. I hope that you win, and I look forward to your debate with Adams. But good luck, because unfortunately you're against a giant of the Democratic Party and their machine. And I hope you can get in and apply that same zeal and vigor that you had when you first started the Guardian Angels, that you seem to still have. I think the city needs that.
terrific. And listen, and unfortunately, thank you so very much, Curtis. All the best to you. We really wish you the best. Thank you so much. We will hopefully do a podcast on this as well. Gotta leave. Thank you again. All the best.
My pleasure. Anytime.
Great. And thank you so very much for watching us here on The Radical Imagination. We'll see you again next week on The Radical Imagination.
One summer afternoon, as the 19th century came to a close, an Irish-American vaudeville singer named Charles Lawler asked his friend James Blake, a salesman in a hat shop, to come up with the lyrics for a tune that had been rattling around in his head for some time. Something about New York, Lawler said. Between serving customers, Blake found himself thinking of the old neighborhood on 18th Street, where he had grown up, and of the people he had known there. Jakey Krause, the baker, and his friend Little Jimmy Crow, and Mamie O'Rourke, who had first taught him how to dance. Set to the lovely lilting two-step Lawler had composed, Blake's haunting memories of the sidewalks of New York would go on to become an enormous hit across the country, and one of the most popular songs ever written about New York City.
East side, west side, all around the town. The tots sang Ring Around Rosie. London Bridge is falling down. Boys and girls together, me and Mamie O'Rourke tripped the light fantastic on the sidewalks of New York. Things have changed since those times. Some are up in G, others they are on the hog, but they all felt just like me. They would part with all they've got. Could they but once more walk with their best girl and have a twirl on the sidewalks of New York?